Hello and welcome to Lesson 2 Forensic Psychology Bottom-Up Processing. So in this session we're going to look at bottom-up processing and two main approaches. The first is investigative psychology and geographical profiling. So let's start with some key terms. A bottom-up approach really refers to using data and statistical techniques to make predictions about the likely characteristics of the offender. Geographical profiling refers to a version of bottom-up profiling that extracts information from the location and tries to see if there's a geographical pattern when crimes are being committed. And investigative psychology, another form of bottom-up profiling based on psychological theory. So investigative psychology. This approach is developed by David CANTER, this fella here, and he really believes that psychology should be integral to investigative work. Essentially he said that profiling should be grounded in theory. And very much this was a reaction to the top-down profiling, which, as you know, is based largely on intuition. The scientific process can be deductive or inductive, so you can start with a theory and then conduct hypotheses and develop hypotheses and conduct experiments to test them, or you can start the other way around. Start with an observation, test some theories, develop a hypothesis. In investigative psychology, we often work inductively. Investigative psychology then, interpersonal coherence. One of the key features of this approach is interpersonal coherence. This refers to the idea that the offender should behave the same way when committing a crime as they do in everyday life. So a violent offender who commits a violent crime should be a violent person in their personal life. Dwyer, for example, distinguished between two categories of rapists: those who seek to control and humiliate their victims, and those who were quite apologetic. And he hypothesized that these individuals would behave in a similar way in their personal lives. Time and place is another important part of investigative psychology. CANTER says that the significance of location can lead us to the potential offender because certain clues may be left behind. We're going to look at this in a bit more detail when we get to geographical profiling in just a wee bit. And then we have forensic awareness. So offenders that have been through the system before may display behaviors that indicate their awareness of forensic procedures. A classic example might be wearing gloves or wiping fingerprints off of potential surfaces. So that's investigative profiling. Now we've got Kim ROSSMO'S geographical profiling, which is also a popular form of bottom-up profiling. This approach uses a computer system for serial violent crime investigation. Essentially what happens is you input the data of the crime regarding the location, the geography, and it will track a variety of different variables. The premise behind using this software is that the criminal must know something about the geographical location of where the offence is going to be committed, and you saw that in last lesson with the Yorkshire Ripper. His first crime was in the vicinity of his own domain where he lived. And the geographical features of an area may determine where the crime takes place. So, for example, many criminals, and this was true of the Yorkshire Ripper, will take their victim to a secluded area where they're unlikely to be disturbed. But that secluded area will be determined by their availability. So if there's a woods nearby, maybe that will be the location. This approach has been widely used by the FBI, Scotland Yard, the NYPD, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So remember, if it's a widely used technique, that lends the method validity. Circle theory then. So this is another element of CANTER's theory, developed by CANTER and Larkin in 1993, and suggests that most offenders have a sort of like imaginary circle set in a geographical location within which crimes are committed. A bit like, cats never leave a sort of 2-mile circle from home. Apparently offenders are the same. As a result, Larkin and CANTER attempted to categorize 2 types of offenders. We have marauders. These are offenders whose home is within the geographical area. They live in the same town, the same county, or whatever. And then you have the commuter. The offender travels to another geographical location and commits a crime. The criminal geographic targeting then. So this is a computer system developed by Kim ROSSMO'S, and we saw a screenshot of that back here. Sorry, it's hiding behind me. But there's a screenshot. So, essentially this is a computer program. The formula produces a 3-dimensional map displaying data related to space, time, distance, movement to and from the crime scene. So it essentially is building up a model of of all the characteristics of the geography, and in theory can predict the likely location that crimes might be committed. This is referred to as the jeopardy surface, with different colours indicating likely closeness to a crime scene. So here we have an example of a jeopardy surface with the red colouring increasing the likelihood of a crime being committed in that area. As you can see as well, we have a series of numbers. These are suspects' residences, and the reds and probability is generated for each of these potential offenders that determines the likelihood that they committed the offence. So scientific basis, let's evaluate this. The bottom-up approach, does it have credibility? Well, it's much more scientific than the top-down approach. Remember, we looked at the limitations of that. It is largely data-driven. It relies on sound inputs, so garbage in, garbage out. If the inputs that you put into the system are not valid or irrelevant, then what you get out will also be. And it's based on actual apprehended offenders, which in one way gives it validity because these are real criminals, so it has external validity. However, maybe certain types of criminals get caught more often than others, and therefore we are developing a profile that only fits those types of criminals who get caught. CANTER and Heritage, they carried out a study in which they attempted to categorize the different patterns present in rapes, for example. They looked at 66 sexual offences from different police forces all over the country and a total of 27 offenders. 33 offence variables were developed from these 66 offences, but there were 5 that CANTER suggested were key, and that is the surprise attack, vaginal intercourse, impersonal language, victim's clothing disturbed, and no reaction to the victim. He concluded that these 5 discernible elements are key to sexual offence behaviour. Is it useful? Well, Copson surveyed 48. So Copson surveyed 48 UK police forces using the techniques, and 75% said that profilers' advice had been useful. However, only 3% said their advice had actually led to identifying the offender. Most said that they would use a profiler again. So, here's a massive issue here. Whilst people are reporting, self-report, that profiling is useful, they're not necessarily objectively, profiling is not leading to greater apprehension. Is circle theory any good? Well, CANTER and Larkin looked at 45 sexual assaults. They found that it supports a model. There's more detail on this in the guide notes. However, they found that their model overly classified suspects as marauders, and they found very few suspects who would be classified as commuters. Petherick argues that it's oversimplified. Some cities are just not suited for a circle theory. I mean, imagine you've got a harbour, you would have to be committing crimes in the sea. Or you might have big mountains which are difficult to scale. Geographical profiling, well, ROSSMO is one of the key supporters of geographical profiling. Obviously, he sells the software and as a result has potentially a vested interest. Although it does not solve crime specifically, it can be used in house-to-house searches, and that's not to be underestimated. Remember last time we looked at breaking down and limiting some of the suspects. In the Yorkshire Ripper case, again, there were 260,000 suspects. ROSSMO worked for the Vancouver Police Department for a while and introduced them to geographical profiling, but was later dismissed, and geographical profiling has been discontinued. He still promotes his software, obviously, but the police forces aren't buying anymore. Does profiling even work? Well, the evidence is mixed, from last time. It cannot reliably predict or identify offenders. Profiling gets police to consider different factors involved in crime. However, sticking to a particular profile can result in injustice, as we saw in the Guardian article from last time. Paul Britton, for example, helped the police to profile Colin Stagg. A great deal of time and money was actually invested in it. He was completely innocent, and it was Robert Napper who was the actual criminal. So Britton's profiling actually led them down a dead end. Here are 3 books that you might want to indulge in for a bit of wide. So we've got The Jigsaw Man by Paul Britton, a nice easy read. I have a copy of this, I'll bring it in. Got Mapping Murder by David CANTER. I've never actually read this, so I can't vouch for it, but CANTER's academic work is pretty sound. And Helter Skelter, the true story of the Manson murders. If you want to branch out, buy one. You can pick up a copy of this for like a couple of pounds. They're cheap as chips. So this has been bottom-up approach to profiling. We have talked about investigative psychology and some of the features of it, and we looked at ROSSMO'S geographical profiling. We did a little bit of evaluation. There is far more information in the guide notes, so please read them. And if you have any questions, as always, you know how this works. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Can you fill in the quiz that's linked on the page, and have yourself a wonderful evening.